My name is Hannah Foster, and I'm 28 years old. Growing up, our house was filled with the sounds of laughter, chaos, and family. But somehow, I always felt like an outsider. I wasn't the youngest, or the oldest, or the golden child. I was the one in the middle, the one who had to pick up the pieces when no one else could. I had two younger sisters, Sophie and Grace, and an older brother, Harrison, who always seemed to get the lion's share of attention. From a young age, I learned to take care of things without anyone noticing. While other kids ran outside, I stayed home and helped Mom with the housework. When Harrison was busy pursuing his dreams, I quietly supported the family in ways I didn't even realize until later. Our parents, Ruth and Leo, weren't perfect, but they worked hard. Dad was always at the factory, and Mom juggled part-time jobs. They made sure we had food on the table, but the emotional side was missing. Harrison, being the oldest, seemed to have special treatment from the start. I couldn't help but notice the differences. Harrison got a new car when he graduated high school, a shiny, red Honda Civic. I graduated a year later, and all I got was a card and a promise to help with college. It wasn't that I wasn't loved, but it was clear that my role in the family was to take care of things, not to be noticed. The years went by, and I found myself back in town after college, ready to start my career. My job at a financial firm meant long hours, but the promise of a stable future kept me focused. I hadn't planned on returning home, but my parents insisted, and with a new office opening in my hometown, it felt like the right opportunity. On my first day back, the house felt smaller. Sophie and Grace were now teenagers, but I quickly realized that much had changed. My brother, Harrison, had already moved out and was living on his own. When I saw him again, I was surprised at how distant he seemed. And there was Jameson, his fiancée. She was tall, poised, and flawless in a way that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't just her appearance that struck me. It was the way she carried herself, as if she were already part of the family. It wasn't long before I started noticing how our parents fawned over her, how they apologized for the smallest things, even though she didn't seem to appreciate anything they did. My sisters were uncomfortable too, but they didn't say much. The tension simmered under the surface when Jameson started making demands. She wanted everything perfect for the wedding, and that included making sure we all looked a certain way. From dress fittings to the rehearsal dinner, she had it all planned. The worst part came when she insisted that we learn a full choreographed dance for the wedding reception. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, especially with the back injury I'd suffered years ago. But Jameson wasn't interested in my limitations. She wanted perfection, no excuses. One evening, we sat down as a family, and that's when it happened. Jameson handed out the schedule for the wedding, with every detail mapped out, including the dance. I hesitated, trying to gauge the situation. When I told her I couldn't do the routine due to my back injury, she didn't care. "Don't be difficult, Hannah," she snapped. "You can do it. I'm sure you'll be fine." I stood my ground, but she wasn't having it. Instead of backing down, she came up with a new demand. If I didn't participate, I owed Harrison $15,000 as a wedding gift. The room went silent. I couldn't believe it. I had already been trying to do everything right, making sure my job didn't interfere with family obligations. But this was too much. I told her I wouldn't pay, and when she stormed out, Harrison followed her, looking torn. When they left, Ruth and Leo turned on me. "How could you, Hannah?" Ruth asked, her voice shaky. "You know how much this wedding means to Harrison's future." I couldn't believe it. "I have a back injury, Mom. I can't do this," I shot back. My dad, usually so calm, looked angry. "You need to apologize to Jameson," he said firmly. "Do it for Harrison's sake." I was floored. "This isn't about me, is it? It's all about what's best for Harrison." The tension only grew from there. Weeks went by, and every conversation seemed to circle back to Jameson and her wedding plans. Ruth and Leo didn't get it. They were blinded by the idea that Harrison and his future with Jameson were the most important things, and I was left trying to keep my own dignity while feeling like an outsider in my own family. The wedding drew closer, and the pressure only intensified. I kept telling myself I could survive this, that I'd make it through, but the demands piled up. The more I tried to back out of things, the more Jameson insisted that I was ruining everything. She would take every opportunity to remind me of how little I mattered in the grand scheme of things. I started to feel like a stranger in my own family, with Ruth and Leo blindly supporting Jameson and Harrison, as if they were the only ones that mattered. Then the day came when I couldn't take it anymore. The rehearsal dinner was a disaster. Jameson barked orders at us, demanding we perform the routine perfectly. The tension in the room was unbearable. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I stood up and told Jameson exactly what I thought. "I'm not doing this. I can't do this," I snapped. "You don't get to treat me like this. I'm not your personal dancer or your servant." Jameson didn't hesitate. "Fine. Then you owe Harrison $15,000 for the wedding gift. It's only fair since you're ruining my special day." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I stared at her, speechless. How could she ask for that much money? I had already sacrificed so much for this wedding, trying to keep the peace, trying to please everyone. But this? This was the last straw. I refused. I would not be manipulated into paying for something I had no part in. I turned and walked out of the room, my heart pounding. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Sophie. "Are you okay? Mom and Dad are really upset. Please come back." I didn't reply. I couldn't. The next morning, Ruth and Leo sat me down in the living room, their faces tight with anger. Ruth was almost pleading. "Hannah, you need to apologize. Please. Harrison is going to think you're ruining everything." "Ruining everything?" I repeated, feeling the words burn in my throat. "What about me? What about my dignity?" My father's face turned red. "You've always been so selfish, Hannah, always so focused on what you want." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're choosing Jameson over your own daughter, over me." That's when my father dropped the bombshell. "If you can't support your brother and his fiancée, then maybe you shouldn't be here at all." The room went cold. My heart shattered. I was no longer welcome in my own home. I had never imagined my parents would turn their backs on me like this. But the reality hit hard. I stood up, numb, and walked out of the house. I packed a bag that night and moved into the apartment my company had offered me, even though it felt small and empty. I couldn't stay. Not with the way things had gone. The silence in the apartment felt like freedom, but it also felt like a heavy weight I couldn't shake. The wedding came and went, and I didn't attend. I couldn't bear the thought of watching my family cater to Jameson's every whim. I spent the day in my apartment, alone, reflecting on everything. But then, the messages started flooding in. On social media, Jameson posted a dramatic story about how I had tried to ruin her perfect day. She painted herself as the victim, while I was the villain, the jealous, spiteful sister-in-law who couldn't handle Harrison's success. The comments flooded in. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly had strong opinions about me. Selfish, they called me. Cruel. Even Sophie and Grace liked the post. That hurt more than anything. The next few weeks were filled with calls and messages, all of them blaming me for tearing the family apart. But no one asked about how I felt. No one seemed to care that I had stood up for myself. Instead, they were more concerned with Harrison and Jameson's future. Months passed, and I settled into my new routine. Work, home, sleep, repeat. I tried to focus on my career, hoping that burying myself in my job would help me forget the aching emptiness that lingered from the fallout with my family. But I couldn't. No matter how much time passed, the void between us remained. My heart ached for Sophie and Grace, knowing how much they had been dragged into this mess. But I didn't want to reach out. They were clearly in the middle, torn between me and the pressure from Ruth and Leo to support Harrison and Jameson. Then one night, everything changed. It was late when I got a text from Grace. It was brief, almost as if she were afraid to say too much. "Can we talk?" it read. I didn't hesitate. I called her immediately. She picked up after the second ring, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Hannah," she whispered. "I should have supported you. We should have stood by you, but we were scared." The moment she said it, I knew. Something had happened, something terrible. I asked her to meet me, and we arranged to meet at a small cafe far from our hometown. When I saw Grace, she looked awful. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She didn't even look like the same person. I knew immediately that things had gotten worse. Without wasting any time, she started to speak, her voice shaking. After the wedding, it only got worse. Jameson, she started treating us like servants, making us clean her house, cook, do laundry, all without pay. She said it was our duty as family, Grace said, her voice breaking. And Harrison, he just goes along with it. He doesn't even care. I couldn't believe it. "What about Ruth and Leo?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They're fine with it," Grace said bitterly. "They think we need to learn humility. Mom says it'll build character." I felt a wave of anger surge inside me, but I kept my voice steady. This isn't about character. This is about control. This is abuse. Grace nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't want to tell you. I was scared. But I can't take it anymore, Hannah. Please help us. I felt the weight of her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Sophie was living the same nightmare. How had I been so blind? I promised Grace I would do everything I could to help. The next day, I went straight to Ruth and Leo's house. When Ruth opened the door, she looked surprised to see me. Hannah, what are you doing here? She asked, her voice tense. I didn't wait for an invitation. I walked past her into the living room where Leo was reading the newspaper. We need to talk, I said firmly. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked at both of them, seeing them clearly for the first time, the parents who had turned their backs on me. What's this about? Leo asked, his voice sharp. Grace told me everything, I said, about how Jameson is treating her and Sophie. You can't keep pretending this is okay. Ruth's face hardened. I don't know what Grace has been telling you, but... No, I interrupted. Don't deny it. I know the truth. How can you let Jameson do this to your daughters? There was a long, painful silence before Leo stood up, his face turning red with anger. You listen to me, Hannah. Jameson is family now. She's given Harrison opportunities we could only dream of. If the girls need to help out a little, it's a small price to pay. My stomach twisted. A small price? They're being treated like slaves, and you're okay with that? You're letting Jameson destroy this family. Enough, Leo shouted, his face turning purple. I won't have you coming in here stirring up trouble. Jameson is Harrison's wife. And if you can't accept that, maybe you're not part of this family anymore. The words hit me harder than I expected. It felt like a punch to the gut. My parents were choosing money, status, and Harrison's future over their own daughters. Over me. I stared at them for a long moment, my mind racing. And then quietly I said, I'm done. I'm done trying to fix this family. Ruth wouldn't even look at me, and Leo glared at me with hatred in his eyes. Get out, he said, his voice cold. Don't come back until you're ready to apologize to Harrison and Jameson. I left without a word, my heart breaking with every step I took away from the house I once called home. I had never felt so alone. The weeks that followed were a blur of isolation. I threw myself into work, burying the pain of my family's rejection behind deadlines and spreadsheets. It was easier that way. I convinced myself that my new life, far from the suffocating grip of my parents, was the fresh start I needed. But no matter how many times I told myself that, a gnawing emptiness lingered in the back of my mind. I thought about Sophie and Grace every day. I knew their lives were getting harder by the minute under Jameson's cruel reign, and my heart ached knowing I was powerless to help them. I sent them texts here and there, but they were always short, distant, as though they had been told not to speak to me. Then, one night, everything changed again. It was pouring rain when I got the knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find Sophie and Grace, drenched and holding suitcases. Sophie looked up at me, her eyes red from crying, and said, Hannah, we need your help. I didn't need to ask anything more. I pulled them inside, wrapped them in blankets, and made hot tea. They looked exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and I could tell something had broken inside them. After a few moments of silence, Grace finally spoke, her voice trembling. After the wedding, it got worse. Jameson, she started treating us like servants. She makes us clean her house, cook for her, do laundry, all for free. And Harrison, he doesn't do anything. He just lets it happen. Mom and Dad say it's character building, but it feels like abuse. We can't take it anymore. I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Why did you let this happen? Sophie shifted uncomfortably, looking down at the floor. We were scared. And Mom and Dad, they said we had to respect family. We were afraid they'd turn on us too, like they did with you. The weight of their words hit me hard. How could my parents, the people who had raised us, let this happen? How could they turn a blind eye to the cruelty that Jameson was inflicting on their own daughters? I'm so sorry, Hannah, Grace whispered, her eyes filled with guilt. We should have spoken up earlier. We just didn't know what to do. I pulled them into a hug. It's not your fault. I'm going to fix this. We'll figure this out together. The next morning, I marched straight to Ruth and Leo's house. I wasn't going to let them continue to live in denial any longer. I had made up my mind. I would stand up for Sophie and Grace, even if it meant losing everything. When I entered the house, Ruth was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters. Leo was on the couch, reading the newspaper, just like before. It was as if nothing had changed. But I had changed. I wasn't going to sit back and watch them destroy my sisters any longer. We need to talk, I said firmly. Both of them looked up at me, surprise flickering across their faces. "What's going on, Hannah?" Ruth asked, her voice cautious. "I know what Jameson is doing to Sophie and Grace," I said, my voice steady, but my heart pounding. "And I know you're turning a blind eye to it. You can't keep letting her treat them like this." Ruth opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. "I'm done being quiet. This isn't about building character. This is about abuse, and I won't let it happen any longer." Leo slammed his newspaper down, his face turning red. "You don't understand. Jameson is Harrison's wife. She's important to him and to our future. We can't just turn our backs on her." "That's the problem," I shot back. "You've already turned your backs on your own daughters. You're so blinded by your need for status and success that you don't even see what's happening to Sophie and Grace." Ruth stood up, her eyes filling with tears. "It's not that simple, Hannah. You don't understand what this means for the family." "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Explain how you can sit there and let your daughters be treated like this, all for the sake of a future with Jameson and her money." The room fell silent. Leo glared at me, but I could see the tension in his face. Ruth's tears flowed freely now. "I won't be a part of this anymore," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm taking Sophie and Grace with me. They're coming home with me, where they'll be safe." "Don't you dare!" Leo started, but Ruth placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. "I've had enough," Ruth whispered. "Maybe it's time we listen to Hannah." For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of regret in my parents' eyes, but it was too late. I turned on my heel, my sisters in tow, and walked out the door, leaving my parents and their delusions behind. The days that followed were a whirlwind of change. Sophie and Grace moved into my small apartment, and though it wasn't much, it felt like freedom. We spent the next few weeks adjusting to a new routine. It wasn't perfect, and the apartment was cramped, but it was ours, and it was safe. We could breathe again, free from the suffocating control that Jameson had imposed on them. For the first time in years, I saw Sophie and Grace start to smile again. They were no longer shadows of the people they used to be. They were reclaiming their lives piece by piece. I helped them with job applications, shared meals with them, and listened to their stories I hadn't heard in far too long. The guilt I had carried for not helping them sooner began to fade as we found our rhythm. Sophie got a part-time job at a local bookstore, and Grace enrolled in a community college to pursue her passion for graphic design. It wasn't the glamorous life Jameson had promised them, but it was real. It was theirs. I found myself closer to my sisters than I had ever been. There were no more hidden resentments, no more unspoken fears. We spoke openly about what had happened, what we had lost, and what we hoped for in the future. It was painful, but it was also liberating. For the first time in my life, I was not alone. We were a family again, stronger, if not broken, by the weight of the past. A few months passed, and I started to settle into my new role, not just as the protector, but as the leader of our new family unit. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. I'd given up the dream of ever truly fitting into the family I had grown up with, but I had built something better with Sophie and Grace. One evening, after dinner, we were sitting on the couch laughing at a silly story Grace had shared about a disastrous art class when the doorbell rang. My heart skipped a beat when I saw who it was, sis. It was William Hartley, Jameson's father, standing in front of me with a remorseful expression on his face. I had no idea what he wanted, but I wasn't ready to hear anything about Jameson. I had spent too long letting her control everything, and I wasn't about to let that happen again. "I know this is unexpected," William began, his voice low, "but I've come to apologize." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. The man who had let his daughter destroy my family, who had stood by while Jameson turned her wealth into a weapon, was now standing on my doorstep, asking for forgiveness. "I didn't know," he continued, his face filled with regret. "I didn't know how she was treating you all. I thought she was the perfect daughter, but I see now that I was wrong. I failed you." I didn't know how to respond. My emotions were too raw, too mixed. "I'm sorry," he repeated. "I was blinded by her, but if there's anything I can do to make things right, I will. I don't want to be the man who turns a blind eye anymore." It took everything in me not to shut the door on him, but I knew that holding on to anger, holding on to the past, wasn't going to help anyone. Not me, not Sophie, and not Grace. "I appreciate you coming here," I said finally, my voice steady, but my heart still heavy. "But the damage is done. We can't undo what's happened. And I'm not sure we can ever forgive Jameson for what she's done to us." He nodded, understanding. "I can't change the past, but I want to make sure you and your sisters are okay. please let me help. If there's anything you need, anything at all, I'm here. I looked at him for a long moment. Part of me wanted to tell him to leave, to go back to his perfect life and forget about the mess he'd created. But another part of me recognized the depth of his regret. Maybe, just maybe, he could be the ally we needed to finally break free from the toxic grip Jameson had on our family. Thank you, I said quietly after a long pause. But right now, we're focused on rebuilding. Maybe we'll talk again when we're ready. But right now, I'm not sure what help you could offer. He nodded again, respecting my decision. I understand, but I'm here if you ever change your mind. And with that, he left. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, and it didn't change everything, but it was a step forward, a small but meaningful one. As the months passed, things slowly started to heal. Sophie and Grace grew stronger every day. We built a new life for ourselves, one that was based on our own rules, our own love, and our own definition of family. Sometimes I'd look back and think about what could have been, about the family I used to have, the one that had let me down, that had failed me when I needed them most. But then I'd look at Sophie and Grace, and I realized something important. Family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose to stand by you when everyone else walks away. It's about the ones who show up, who fight for you, who love you even when the world tries to tear you apart. And in that moment, as I sat with my sisters, I knew we had built something stronger than anything I could have ever imagined. No matter what came next, we would face it together.